Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Panzer 38T. This is a 28mm or 156 scale plastic model by Warlord Games, and it's intended for use with their game Bolt Action, though you could of course use it for any game you like in that scale. I've been kind of excited to build this for a while now, but I've just been putting it off. I am expecting it to be just as great as the Marder 3 was. I'll be kind of surprised if it turns out worse. The back of the box shows us some painted examples of the model, a couple of paragraphs of information on the Panzer 38T, along with some images of the contents of the box and an ad for Tank War. That's all well and good, but let's look at what's inside the box. First, the damage markers that are pretty much a standard in Warlord's kits now. Don't get me wrong, I like them, but by now we've seen them a billion times. So let's look at the plastic. There are two sprues in this box. The first one looks to be the same as the one in the Marder 3 kit, which would make sense. The lower hull of that is the same as the Panzer 38T. Why make an entirely new sprue when the parts are the same anyway? The smaller sprue has the parts you'll need to make this into a Panzer 38T, which is mostly the turret. Most of the parts on these sprues are very neat and tidy. They look great and the detail is very nice. There's a lot of raised rivet details, which is cool. The Panzer 38T certainly had that, though I do have one complaint, which would be that there are some mould lines that run along the rows of rivets. You probably don't need to think too hard about why that might be annoying. The mould lines aren't too bad, though they are a little bit heavy in some areas, so they will need to be removed. Otherwise, everything looks pretty good. The detailing is quite good, and it looks like everything should go together pretty easily. The sprues are unmarked, which might be annoying for some, myself included, but it's easy enough to refer to the labelled sprue diagrams in the instruction booklet. This sheet of decals are included and do look quite good. There are markings for German, Hungarian, Bulgarian, and Romanian panzers, which is a good variety if you ask me. The decals Warlord supply are usually pretty good and you shouldn't have any issues with them if you do use them. There's also this stat card. As you might expect, this has pertinent information that might be helpful to you in your games of Bolt Action. And of course there's the instruction booklet. This is quite nice. The first page has most of the same text as the back of the box. There's also a breakdown of how the decals should be used, sprue diagrams, and of course the instructions themselves. These are pretty simple to understand and follow, and I didn't notice any errors in the instructions, so there are no complaints from me. The last couple of pages have some basic painting suggestions with pictures, which is always nice. Let's use these instructions to guide us in the adventure of gluing bits of plastic together. First, we'll build the tracks using all of these parts, at least for one track set anyway. We'll need more parts for the other one. First, I glue on this final drive casing part. This has a D-shaped keying so that you get it into place properly, though it does have a tiny bit of play in it. That shouldn't be too much of an issue. Next comes the drive sprocket. This has the same D-shaped keying. It also has the same little bit of play in it. Because of this, I use the top section of track to test fit and make sure it lines up nice and neat. Might as well attach that next, so I apply some glue and then put it into place. There are some guide horns that are missing to clear the return rollers. This should help you be sure that the tracks are the right way around. I then added the rear curved section. It looks very similar to the front one, but they're differently sized enough that you will have trouble putting the wrong part on the wrong end, which I suppose is nice. Next comes the bottom section of track. This is also very simple to get into place. I finish it off with the front curved section. This also, unsurprisingly, goes together great. Having built the Marder 3 kit, I knew this would be pretty easy and turn out looking very good. The other track set goes together in pretty much the same way. We can then attach these to the lower hull part. The hull has pins on either side that will slot into some corresponding holes on the inner part of the track sets. Very easy to put together. I apply a bit of pressure to make sure the tracks are as close to the hull as they should be, and then we can move along to adding the upper hull part. This more or less just drops right into place. You don't really need to worry too much about gaps. If there are any, they'll be hidden on this part anyway. We will have to take care of that big hole in the front of the lower hull though. Good thing there's this lower front plate part that is just perfect for that. This goes into place quite easily, and it's a very good fit. Didn't even really need to apply gap nullifying pressure. Nice. Now to build up the fighting compartment and turret ring area. All of these parts will kind of link together, but there isn't really any keying as such. It seemed like a good idea to start at the front, because when we slot that part in, the sides of the hull hold it almost perfectly in place. There is a minute amount of play, but not enough to worry about. I then glue the left side plate on. This lines up with the front plate quite nicely. I then quickly add the right side plate, which also lines up with the front part. Then, before the glue sets, I used the roof and turret ring part to make sure everything was lined up properly, which I didn't film, but then I glued it into place, which looks pretty much the same as the test fitting did, except I used glue, obviously. That's a pretty good looking hull so far if you ask me, though it is lacking an engine deck, and that just looks plain wrong. The engine deck part is one of those I mentioned that had mould lines along the rivets, the ones on the lower edge. That was kind of annoying, but I cleaned it up as best I could. Other than that, the part looks fine and it goes into place very easily as you saw. Next comes the lower rear plate. It's another very easy to install part. Do try to line it up with the engine deck as neatly as you can. Dat ass is incomplete. The instructions say it's now time to work on the turret, but I want to keep working on the hull, so time to rebel. Next I add the muffler. This has a slot on the back of it which mounts onto the two poles sticking up out of the rear plate. This goes on really easily, and it has the added bonus of hiding any gaps you might have where the rear plate joins the engine deck. Then come these lumps. I guess these might actually be lift points, but they don't have a hole in them for the shackles. But they do have a little tab on the bottom to help guide them into place. Either way, they go here like so. They should be flush with the side of the hull, or as close to it as you can get. Tweezers were quite helpful here, and I used my knife to nudge them into their final position. Next, it's time for some hooks. As hooks often are, these are pretty small and kind of fiddly, but they're not too hard to get into place. I didn't even need the tweezers. There's obviously this central one and two more, different ones that mount into the holes on either side of the lower rear plate. It takes a bit of nudging before I'm satisfied with them, but I do get there. Not too hard at all, and now the crew can do hook things, so that's nice. I then add this box, which I'm pretty sure is a holder for the smoke candles. It's an optional part, and the instructions note that it's not for use on the B version. I'm not at all sure which variant I'm building, but I'm adding this box because I think it looks interesting, so it's not the B version. It's pretty easy to put this into place, though it did need a tiny nudge. Now to the front of the tank, where I add some more hooks. These are exactly the same as the two I put on the rear, only difference is these go on the front. They're just as hooky as the rear ones. Then comes this pole with a little loop on top. I probably asked what this was when I built the Marder 3, and maybe somebody answered, but I've forgotten. Is it a radio antenna? What I do know is that it's pretty easy to install. And so is the convoy light, which goes right here on the left mudguard bit. Very easy. Looks good too. I then add the spare track links. I waited until the hooks would be bonded into place to do this so that I wouldn't knock them out of position installing this spare track. It mounts very easily into the two holes intended for it, and it looks really good. Now a decision must be made. That being whether to add the machine gun or the patch that goes over its mounting hole. I decided to use the patch. This was apparently done to a lot of command tanks so that they could put another radio in place of the machine gun. I like that story, so I'm going with it. I think the patch looks interesting, and it might look less cluttered than having another relatively big machine gun sticking out. Next comes a stowage box, and another decision. I've used this stowage box because it was more interesting than the other one, which is just a plain rectangular box. Apparently the box I've used would make this tank either an Ausführung E, F or G. Which one? I don't know. I don't suppose it's really important though. Then comes the jack. I think this is where it should go. Even if it really isn't, I think it looks fine here anyway. And that's the hull done. I'm pretty happy with it, though it does look a little bit silly without a turret, so let's make one. There isn't too much to this. I glued the turret front onto the right side part. No reason for that, I just picked it up first. This goes together pretty easily. There isn't really any keying to lock it in, but you can clearly see when the parts are properly lined up. I then add the left side of the turret. Both sides of the turret have keying in the form of some pins and sockets to make sure things are lined up nicely. And then I add the turret rear. It doesn't quite fit so well, unfortunately. There's a bit of a gap and pressure didn't totally fix it. I add the roof quickly to make sure there's still time to make adjustments before the glue sets. The result is pretty good, though the rear is still a bit disappointing, though I guess it could be worse. Next comes the commander's cupola. This is made up of 2 parts. I glue the first one in. This has a pin to ensure that it's facing the correct way, and then I glue the upper half on. This is also keyed so everything lines up. I did have to apply quite a bit of pressure to get these parts to go together though, and there is still a bit of a gap around it, but it's not too bad. The bigger problem I had with it is that there were mold lines along the rows of rivets, which I found annoying and tricky to clean up. Next comes the commander's lid. What, you call it a hatch? Well, aren't you fancy? This goes into place easily, and of course can be modelled open. There are 2 commander figures to choose from to put in here, one for early war and one for mid to late war. As usual, I'm modelling my hatch closed. Then I add what appears to be a periscope. This is an interesting looking part. It's easy to install too. I'm positioning the opening facing forward, but I'm assuming this could swivel around for a 360-degree view. Next comes a little handrail that mounts into the 2 holes just behind the cupola. It's a tiny part, but I found it surprisingly easy to place. This tank probably wouldn't be very effective with no guns, so why not add some now? First, the machine gun. This just slots into the hole in the right side of the turret. Simple enough. Then I drilled out the barrel on the main gun, though it's almost what I would consider to be too small to worry about. It does make it look a lot better though, so I'm glad I did it. I glue the main gun into position with the little bump thing above the gun. I set it to the elevation I want, and that's it. Turret complete. It locks onto the hull with a pair of locking tabs, much like a lot of other Warlord tanks. Nice and simple. And that is the Warlord plastic Panzer 38T in 28mm scale completed. I don't have another Panzer 38T in this scale to compare this model with, but I do know that Warlord makes a metal and resin version, and I would wager that this plastic model is significantly better. I think it's a very good model, both in the appearance of the finished product and in the fact that it was a pleasure to build. It's not perfect, of course. My biggest problem with it was the mold lines that ran along rows of rivets. What a pain in the ass that was. They would have been fine if there were no rivets, they weren't particularly terrible mold lines, it was just hard to clean them up without destroying the rivets. I guess as far as problems go, that's certainly not the worst you could have, but it is an issue, so why not point it out? In the end, it's a very good model, and it has a lot of nice detail, which is crisp and neatly moulded. A lot of this build was pretty much the same as with Warlord's Marder 3 kit, which is why I'm not surprised with how well this went together and how good it looks. Though this kit is a bit of an easier build because the Marder 3 had a lot of detail inside the open-topped fighting compartment. If you want to see the Marder video, I will put a link in the description. Enough about the Marder though, this video is about the Panzer 38T. It looks great, and I rather enjoyed the assembly process, and I think you might too. I would happily build several more, though I don't think I really need them. Maybe I can contrive a reason. One of the things I like about this kit is the number of marking choices you get on the decal sheet. I might not even paint this up as a German tank. It could be interesting to try something different, though I don't have a Hungarian, Bulgarian, or Romanian force. I could just paint the tank for those forces and enjoy it as something different. That said, I probably won't be painting this too soon. I've got a bunch of other things on my plate and this is way down on the list, so I have plenty of time to ponder and decide on a paint scheme for it. So what do you think of this little Panzer? Have you built this kit yourself? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, if you haven't already, why not do all the liking, subscribing and following things here on YouTube, Twitch and my other social media places. And if you really like the things I do, please consider supporting over on Patreon, or by purchasing a shirt or mug from my merch store. Links to all of the things I just mentioned are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.